Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lazaro Rodriguez, and this is my discussion for the week. Uh, First question is: what is your position on allowing correctional inmates access to college courses while in prison? How about access to financial aid for college after the sentence is complete? Think of the cost of prison as about $30,000 a year and consider how education can lead to rehabilitation. I have no problem allowing inmates to be able to conduct college courses before, after, during, while they're serving their sentence. Uh, the reason why is because I think too often people get incarcerated and they're forgotten, and they're just kind of kicked to the curb. Nobody really thinks about them because they committed a crime, whether it was a really serious crime or a really bad crime, and and then we just forget about them. It's not a problem anymore. And then when they eventually go back to their life of crime because they serve 5 years for some type of larceny, then they go back out into the world. They have nobody to support. They don't have any family members. They don't have no job, no education. They can't have no food, so they end up homeless. Maybe they decide to steal again, and then they just go back in the same cycle. That's why you see some of the people being continued rapid offenders. Um, so allowing inmates to be able to go to college, do college while in in prison or jail, I think that would be fine. I think, however, there shouldn't be any special circumstances for it. So if the person can receive tuition assistance while they're an inmate, if the person can receive a loan, if the person can get his or her classes paid by like a family member, there's absolutely no problem with that. I think, however, there should be guidelines. So, for example, if you're someone who your sentence is more than 8 years, you should not be allowed to conduct courses while you're in prison, just because there has to be some type of cutoff, right? You don't want somebody who's going to be serving 25 years of time in prison to be doing college courses because they're there to serve a sentence at the end of the day. But somebody within 8 years of being released, I think that's fine. For example, the Army, they have a program for tuition assistance where they allow you to do 15 credit hours every year. So it takes you about 8 years to get your bachelor's. That's kind of how that is pretty much how I based off my recommendation of that. And then as them being able to receive financial aid after the sentence, that would be fine as well. But there are no special circumstances. It's just if you get accepted, you get accepted. If you don't, you don't. I don't get accepted for it, and I'm not an inmate. It's tough to get accepted anyways. At least you get a grant. All right, the second question says the mayor of St. Louis has appointed you to a commission whose task is to develop policy recommendations to ameliorate the high rate of violence against young girls in the city's disadvantaged neighborhoods and schools. What would you propose? Really hard, really hard to try to change anything in a neighborhood because there's now you're talking about a mixture of kids, adults, and every time you have just people living on their own, it's really hard to change that besides just regular, maybe more constant policing. But as far as schools, that's a little bit easier because now you have the attention of the child as a school. I think if I was to change my policy, what I would do is I would recommend having a class at all levels of education through elementary school, middle school, and high school. At least one class that a child has to take, perhaps maybe every 2 years. Depends. I don't know exactly what would be the best rate, but this class essentially would be like an awareness on violence. So it doesn't just have to be specific towards educating, for example, a 13-year-old on why they shouldn't beat up their sister, but it could be a class about anything, about why you shouldn't be able to beat up anybody, why violence is not the best choice, especially for something when they're that young. I think the reason why there's so much violence right now in certain areas, specifically like against women in neighborhoods of more poverty, is because a lot of the men who are usually the one producing this violence against the women, they do not have the teachings that they should, because maybe their parents were also in that same cycle and it's just repeating itself. So by having a class throughout their life, they can have some type of understanding. And the more people are aware of something, the more they're more likely to understand it. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be for everything, right? Some kids are just not going to go to school, and maybe by the time they're 17 years old, they're going to think the course is stupid. And that is what it is. But if you can just change the minds and the mindset and prevent some type of harm being done in the future, even just a few kids out of 100, that's much better than nothing. And the last question says the test suggests the preliminary evidence indicating that African American juveniles are more likely than white juveniles to be waived to adult court should be confirmed by additional research that incorporates legally relevant criteria other than the scenarios of the offense. What other variables should be taken into consideration? I think of two right away, and I think for the most part this is kind of done. It just depends on who really is the judge and how things work out. But the the person's prior record and their age should be probably up there top three, along with what type of crime they committed, as far as factors. Because I'm sorry, Mom, I don't know if you can hear my mom. Um, because of factors, those are three factors that really have a lot to do with how likely a person is going to commit another crime, or the seriousness of it, and whether they should be moved from juvenile detention to now being adult. So looking at the prior record, right? Are they doing this very often? Looking at their age. So if they're a younger child, they're more likely to probably not do this again. And if you have somebody that's like 16 years old with a prior record, is continuing to do the same crimes over and over again, especially if it's a repetitive crime. Maybe, and it's probably case by case, maybe they should be moved into adult correction. But the problem with these things, and it goes both ways. If you don't have guidelines, now you have the thoughts of just a judge, and one judge might think that this person should go to this type of detention program versus this other person and for this long. So if you don't have guidelines, it's like that. But now if you do have guidelines, like sometimes some of these children or these juveniles who have committed the same crime, but one of them doesn't have the prior record that this other one does, and that other one should be taken to the adult detention center. If you have like a difference and you have now guidelines, you're kind of like forced to send that child anyways, that juvenile, even if you don't think they should be going to an adult detention center. So there's goods and positives to all that, but those are my thoughts. Thank you so much for listening. Hope you guys have a wonderful day.